Feeling increasingly vulnerable, Egypt's Copts mourn their Pope amid continuing sectarian tension in the country. So what does the passing of Pope Shenouda mean for the future of Coptic Christians? And what are the challenges facing them in post-revolution Egypt? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. Tens of thousands of Coptic Orthodox Christians descend upon Egypt's main cathedral in Cairo to begin a three-day mourning period for Pope Shenouda III. The spiritual leader of the Middle East's largest Christian minority died at the age of 88 following a long illness. Pope Shenouda was the patriarch of most of Egypt's estimated 12 million Christians. His body is displayed for public viewing inside the Abbasiyya Cathedral in Cairo. A funeral will be held on Tuesday at the papal headquarters for Shenouda, who became Pope in 1971. There's no official word on when clergy and others will convene to begin the process of choosing a successor, but a new Pope should be chosen in a matter of 2 or 3 months. His successor will play an important role in forging the Church's position after the overthrow of President Hosni Mubarak last year.
He was, from the very beginning, unlike any other Coptic pope. A soldier in the Egyptian military, a journalist and an author, Pope Shenouda III headed the Coptic Church for 4 decades at a time when the country underwent major transformations. It was his political activity which drew the most attention and the most criticism. He was the first Coptic pope to visit the Vatican in over 1,500 years, stressing the need for Christian unity. He fell out with former President Anwar Sadat because he insisted Egypt should have an official census to determine the number of Copts in the country, an issue that remains unresolved. It's the mix of religion and politics which came to define Pope Shenouda, a charge he defended in a press conference in 2010 when Copts began demonstrating against the Church's firm stand on divorce.
As far as the Church's commitment regarding any religious issue that goes against our beliefs, the Holy Bible and the rules of the Church, we find remarriage unacceptable.
Over the years, he grew sicker, suffering from failing kidneys, which resulted in monthly visits to the United States for dialysis and treatment. Still, the Pope persevered, writing over 100 books and immersing himself in every aspect of Coptic life. During the revolution, the Pope spoke out against the uprising, joining prominent Islamic figures. And again, when there were protests against attacks on Copts after the revolution, the Pope urged Copts to go home and stop demonstrating. A stance which was not appreciated by many Copts. Despite the controversy surrounding many of his political choices and decisions, the Pope remained a widely respected figure in the community, his death leaving many worrying at a time when Egypt is going through major changes. Who can fill his shoes? Shireen Tadros, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
So what does the death of Pope Shenouda mean for Egypt's Coptic Christians? To help us answer this question, we're joined by our guests today, all of them in Cairo. Mona Makram-Ebeid is International Secretary for the Social Democratic Party and a Professor of Political Science at the American University in Cairo. Bishop Angaelos, Bishop of the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria. He was consecrated by Pope Shenouda III. And Omar Ashour, visiting scholar at the Brookings Doha Centre and Director of Middle East Studies at Exeter University. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Mona Makram-Ebeid, the death of the Pope has come at a particularly unfortunate time for Coptic Christians, with political life in Egypt in such a state of flux, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It's with great sadness that we have learned, the great sadness and a shock. Although we knew that he was sick, but we never, you never expected it to be so sudden. And so, in particular, in the present atmosphere, his loss will be even more felt. He was a great national figure. He was not only a religious figure, but a national figure, much broader than the frail body, than his frail body would suggest. And in a way, he was a safety valve, absorbing shocks, moving along, and giving some sort of comfort to a bereaved minority who many often was faced with attacks, with insults, with injustice. And so these are coming up even more profoundly today, particularly that we know that so many Copts have migrated or emigrated since the revolution of the 25th of January, because this feeling of fear for the future, of concern, and of uncertainty.
Okay. Pope, I'm sorry, Bishop Angaelos, he was a passionate advocate of unity among Christian churches. He oversaw a big expansion of the church outside of Egypt. In your opinion, what will be his legacy?
I think he was such a multifaceted man that he leaves many varied legacies behind. I was quite surprised on a very human level, being in Cairo now. I just flew in this morning. The number of people from the Egyptian airline staff that I flew with, to the airport staff, to people in the street that I'm just walking past who said, or gave their condolences and said it was a loss. So at that level, he unified people in Egypt, I think, through his demeanor. But as you say, ecumenically with other churches, I think there was a great drive in the past 20 years for us to be able to engage at various different levels, and officially and unofficially, with the various churches and denominations and groupings across the world. And I think as well, one great passion he had was the passion of teaching, and he drove that forward as well, whether it be Sunday school, whether it be youth ministry. He was just such a multifaceted figure.
A multifaceted figure, Omar Ashour, but to what extent was he also a divisive figure within Egyptian society, someone who helped to maintain rather than break down sectarian division?
Pope Shenouda, may rest in peace, was to a large degree, as the speakers mentioned, a national figure. At the same time, he went through very critical and thorny times. He was the Pope since 1971. This is coinciding with the so-called corrective revolution of President Sadat, all the way until the January 25th revolution of the Egyptian youth, passing through events that were quite polarizing on the Egyptian society. From the 1980s, the events of Al-Zawiya Al-Hamra here, the clashes between Muslims and Copts, leading ultimately to his being exiled by President Sadat. Also the events in the aftermath of the assassination of Sadat and the rise of armed Islamist movements here, creating some of the clashes in Upper Egypt and the stances of the Coptic Church. All the way to the stance on the Egyptian revolution here, which was quite divisive within the church on one side, but also among the Christian communities, the Christian activists as well in Egypt. We saw the Coptic Church headed by Pope Shenouda more or less siding with the status quo, wanted to maintain the status quo as a way to guard its interests and what it perceived as the interests of the Coptic community. At the same time, you saw many of the younger of the bishops and of the younger activists who were saying that this status quo is unsustainable and it is better for the Coptic community as Egyptian citizens to move forward and to support the revolution. You also saw at a later stage in the aftermath of a revolution the will to coordinate more with the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces from the leadership of the church, versus more of the revolutionary stances and more push towards change of this status quo by the younger ranks whether within the church or outside it. And then you have the highlighting the question of what is the political role exactly of the Coptic Orthodox Church. This is an institution that has been there for more than 1900 years. It is very well organized, very well structured, and has vast resources. And what exactly its political role? Does it represent the Coptic community of Egypt, or are there other institutions that do represent it?
All right, well, we'll talk about the church's political role in the future in the course of this program. First of all, Mrs. Makram-Ebeid, you want to respond to that about whether the Pope was a divisive or unifying figure, or is that too simplistic a way of describing him?
I think it is a bit too simplistic, but what I want to say is what I want to comment on the revolution of the 25th of January of last year, because I myself went to Midan Tahrir to encourage and support the young Coptic revolutionaries when the Pope had prevented them, let's say, from participating. I don't think that it was for any other reason than he was scared for them. And I said that I refuse his forbidding them to participate, that on the contrary, he should encourage them. And as a matter of fact, we had many martyrs among the young Copts, and I think the most fantastic scene that we have seen during the 18 days, where the cooperation, the unity, the solidarity between these young people of both religions, Muslim and Christians. So we think that Pope Shenouda Mai's death, with the bereavement that we saw on the faces of so many Muslims today, who are really, really sorry to lose such a figure, because he was not only a religious figure, he was a national figure. Okay. And I think that his last meeting with the Supreme Guide might be, might be a forerunner of more tolerance on both sides.
I know that Bishop Angaelos wants to respond to what you've just said, but first let me ask you, Mrs. Makram-Ebeid, whether you think the next Pope should continue to use the Church as Coptic Christians' political representative, or should he step back from politics and allow the Coptic Christian community in Egypt to engage more on the political in the political landscape themselves?
Absolutely. I think that today, just like the rulers of Egypt should realize that Egypt is no longer the Egypt before the 25th of January. It's a new Egypt. It's an Egypt where youth have their say, and the same thing goes for the church. The young Copts today do not want to be tied or to have their demands within the precincts of the church as they've always done before. Today they're asserting themselves. You could see it in the Maspero events. They demanded their rights. They demanded that justice should be made against those they considered criminals by burning their churches and by attacking them. So there is a new move among the youngsters, the younger community, who want to really be emancipated from the church, although being very loyal to them, but they do not want to take instructions anymore as they used to before. And in fact, today they're organizing themselves as organizations. In fact, I am involved in one of them, which is the Alliance, the National Alliance of Young Copts.
Bishop Angaelos.
I think this is very healthy. It's a healthy sign.
Let me bring in Bishop Angaelos here. Will Pope Shenouda's successor continue to lead the church in the same vein? Do you think, with the same policies? Will there be more openness, transparency in the administration of the church, for example?
Well, can I go back on a couple of points? First of all, we're speaking about His Holiness having prevented people from going to the demonstrations. His Holiness never prevented. His opinion at the time was people should not go. And it's all very good for us in hindsight to say it was such a courageous thing to do. And that's fine if one person goes out in their own capacity responsible for themselves or even a few other people. But when you have someone who is looked upon as guiding millions of people, if things go wrong, they go very wrong. And I think we saw at the time that he was more inclined to take the cautious route, because don't forget, at the time, the old regime was still in place. Everything looked like it was going to go ahead. There was a call for people to come out of their churches and their mosques on a Friday and go into these demonstrations. And the statement at the time was made that churches and mosques should not be places from which people should go to demonstrate. These are places of worship. If people want to demonstrate, they do so in their own time, in their own way.
Okay.
As for new church, I also think the church is dynamic. There's not concept of new and old church. I think what we've seen is that people have become more mobilized in Egypt and more able to do things. And so when people are looking to leadership, then the church helps them. To speak of being emancipated, I think paints a very different picture to the reality, because now that people are wanting to take a more active role in the life of Egypt, as do most Egyptians, then the church is helping that.
Omar Ashour, to what extent is the Pope's death likely to lead to the emergence of divisions, do you think, within the Coptic Church, which had been largely suppressed while he was alive?
I think we will see in this transitional periods major changes within the church and within the Coptic community at large. The unfortunate death of Pope Shenouda came at a time where Egypt is facing, on the one hand, a presidential presidential elections upcoming in June, as well as a constitutional crafting process and a constitutional assembly that is due to be formed. The position of the church on the presidential file was not set and determined yet. And now, in the absence of the Pope, it will be even more difficult. We saw divisions. There was this meeting that was held in his house between 22 leading bishops in the church, 12 of whom declared their support to presidential candidate Makram-Ebeid Omar Ashour, and 10 others were not really ready for accepting Makram-Ebeid Omar Ashour because of his Islamist background. He has been a leading figure in the Muslim Brotherhood earlier on. You also have a constitutional assembly that is supposed to have representatives of the church, but the agreement on how many representatives from the church should be in that assembly, and the argument is that whether the church represents the whole Coptic community or just represent itself as a religious institution, all of these very thorny and sensitive issues are being discussed at the moment, and it's quite unfortunate that the Pope is not there to weigh in with his usual wisdom on these particular thorny issues. So I think because of the sensitivity of the period and because of his absence, there will be major rifts and changes within the community and within the Coptic Church, as we will see in the coming few months and weeks.
Mona Makram-Ebeid, I want to ask you about the Pope Shenouda's lack of criticism of first the Mubarak regime and to a certain extent the Transitional National Council. I mean, what harm has that done to the Coptic Church?
The harm was that he made the Coptic Church believe in the myth that Mubarak was protecting them, was their protector. And so he took a political role, I remember in 2005, by inducing and by almost imposing his views, which were to support Mubarak for a re-election. He then took it upon himself to demand that Gamal Mubarak should be his successor. This is the time when you can say it was two statements that were very divisive in the Coptic community, because many of them refused that. Many of them thought that the church should not have a say. But he had so much pressure from the Mubarak regime And the Copts never realized until after the 25th of January that the instigation of tensions between Christians and Muslims were really instigated by the regime itself.
Okay.
In order that Copts should feel that their only protector is the Mubarak regime, and that their greatest enemy is the eventuality of having an Islamic regime instead.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So you had many people also. Yes.
I'm sorry to cut you short. Time is unfortunately very tight, and I want to give Bishop Angaelos and Omar Ashour another chance to speak. Bishop Angaelos, the Pope was known for leading with an iron grip. He tolerated little dissent. To what extent do you think was that due to his personality, or more to do with the political reality of leading a minority religious faith?
I think it's, again, it's a matter of oversimplification of matters. Again, the term iron grip sounds quite dictatorial, whereas as a bishop in the church, I've never felt that it was dictatorial, and many other people. He had his opinions, and you would expect someone of this caliber and of this position to have his opinions. We must also differentiate between His Holiness having opinions and expressing them and issuing a papal decree of what must be done. That was never done. He had his opinions, he expressed them. Don't forget that those are the same opinions that held the Arab nations very high in place, the Palestinian issue. Those are the same opinions where he held his Ramadan iftar banquets and was also attacked for those at times for trying to be too moderate. So I think we need to look at the totality of the person and look at the totality of the political institution at the time. One other thing is, we speak about change, and change is not a bad thing in church. The church is supposed to change, but we need to differentiate between the ritual and theological and dogmatic side and the life of the church. We don't change easily in terms of dogma and theology, but the life of the church and the expression of the church can change and will indeed change. I definitely agree with Omar, we will see a change, but that's because we are dealing with a very different Egypt at the time, in this coming time.
All right. We have about 2 minutes left. Omar Ashour, to what extent will the shifting political sands in Egypt affect the decisions of those now who are set to choose the next pope? Are Coptic Christians alarmed, you touched on this before, at the political ascendance of the Muslim Brotherhood, and will that affect who they choose to be the next pope?
There is this alarm within the Coptic community, that's for sure, mainly because of the rise of not only of the Muslim Brothers, who were quite moderate in their stances regarding religious sects here in Egypt, but also because of the rise of the Salafis, who control around 25% of the parliament, the Al-Nur party and Al-Asala party, and also the rise of the Islamic group, Construction and Development Party. And the Islamic group, as we know, operated in Upper Egypt for a long time and had its armed wing, which clashed with Christian Copts several times and led to various casualties throughout the 90s. And because of this situation now, they have MP representations, so there is this caution on the side of the Copts, but at the same time, I think the safest way to go is to start strategizing, on the one hand, to have a less political role for the church, to have more involvement of Copts as Egyptian citizens in various political parties, whether on the right or on the left, and to strategize on having a stake in these tremendous changes that Egypt is going through at the moment. And the stake is to continue upholding the democratic process in Egypt, the freedom and the dignity that the youth, whether Muslims or Christians, cried for and shed blood for back in Tahrir during the 18 days, retaining back this spirit and acting on it. I think that's the safest way to go for all Egyptians, including the Coptic Christians.
Okay, many thanks indeed. There, I'm afraid we must leave it. Thank you to all of my guests in Cairo today, Mona Makram-Ebeid, Bishop Angaelos and Omar Ashour. And as always, thank you very much indeed for being with us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, please just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. I'll see you again. Bye for now.